My name is Vanessa, and I am 34 years old. When my 10-year-old daughter walked through our front door clutching a thick winter beanie to her head, in the middle of a sweltering Atlanta summer, I immediately knew something was horribly wrong. But when I gently pulled that hat away and saw the violent, jagged mess my sister-in-law had made of her beautiful hair, I did not scream. I did not fall to the floor and cry. I simply grabbed my car keys and silently mapped out the absolute destruction of her entire life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to turn into a nightmare to protect your child from toxic relatives. It was supposed to be a harmless afternoon. My husband Derek had convinced me to let our daughter Zoe spend a girls' day with his older sister Trish and her daughter Kendall. Trish had just leased a new commercial space to open a high-end luxury spa and wanted to treat the girls to manicures and facials to celebrate. I was hesitant. Trish had always been obsessed with status and appearances, and she never missed a chance to make passive-aggressive comments about my background. As a biracial child, Zoe inherited her father's beautiful, tightly coiled hair and my dark eyes. I spent hours every Sunday washing, conditioning, and carefully braiding Zoe's hair. It was our special bonding time, a celebration of her heritage that I wanted her to wear with absolute pride. When the front door clicked open at 4 o'clock, I was sitting at the kitchen island, reviewing some security protocols for my job as a cybersecurity architect. I expected to hear the familiar sound of Zoe dropping her backpack and telling me all about the spa. Instead, there was only a heavy, suffocating silence. I looked up from my laptop and saw my little girl standing in the entryway. She was physically trembling. Her small shoulders shook with silent sobs, and her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. But the most alarming detail was the heavy wool beanie pulled down low over her ears, hiding her entire head. It was 90 degrees outside. "Zoe, baby, what is wrong?" I asked, pushing my chair back and rushing over to her. She refused to look up. She just stared at the hardwood floor, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. I knelt in front of her, placing my hands gently on her arms. They were ice cold despite the summer heat. "Did something happen with Aunt Trish? Did Kendall say something mean to you?" Zoe shook her head frantically, her small hands flying up to grip the edges of the beanie as if she was terrified I might try to take it away. She let out a choked whimper that broke my heart into a million pieces. "I cannot show you, Mom," she cried, her voice cracking with shame and humiliation. "It is too ugly. I am too ugly." The air in my lungs vanished. No one in my household ever used that word to describe themselves. I reached out slowly, treating her like a frightened bird. "You are not ugly, Zoe. You are the most beautiful girl in the world. Please let me see. Let me help you." It took several minutes of gentle coaxing before her grip on the wool fabric finally loosened. Her hands dropped to her sides, defeated. With a sinking feeling in my gut, I reached forward and slowly lifted the beanie off her head. I froze, the breath completely left my body. The thick, beautiful braids that had fallen halfway down her back just hours ago were gone. In their place was a violent, jagged nightmare. Her hair had been hacked off unevenly right down to the scalp in some places. There was no style or care to it. It looked as though someone had taken a pair of dull kitchen scissors and maliciously chopped away at her identity. Chunks of her natural curls stood up at odd angles, exposing patches of bare skin where the scissors had bitten too close. It was not a haircut. It was an assault. "Who did this?" I asked. My voice did not sound like my own. It was completely hollow, drained of all emotion because the rage expanding inside my chest was too massive to process. Zoe broke down completely, throwing her arms around my neck and burying her ruined hair into my shoulder. "Aunt Trish," she sobbed uncontrollably. "Aunt Trish said my hair was dirty. She said it looked too ghetto for her luxury spa and that she could not take pictures of me and Kendall together for her social media because I would ruin the aesthetic of her brand." I held my daughter tightly, feeling her tears soak into my shirt. Every word she spoke was like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay perfectly still so I would not frighten her further. I tried to stop her. "Mom!" Zoe cried, her small hands gripping my shirt defensively. "I told her you spent hours braiding it for me. I told her I loved my hair. but she grabbed my arm and pushed me into the salon chair. She told me I needed to learn how to look like a proper upper-class girl if I wanted to be seen in public with her. Kendall just sat in the corner and laughed at me while Aunt Trish cut it all off. My vision narrowed. The world around me faded into a sharp, singular focus. "Where is your hair, Zoe?" I asked quietly. "Where are the braids?" She threw them in the garbage. Zoe whispered, her voice thick with devastation. She said that is where trash belongs. A normal mother might have broken down crying right then. A normal mother might have picked up the phone to scream at her husband or text her sister-in-law demanding an explanation. But I am not a normal mother, and my mind does not work like that. I design security systems that protect billions of dollars from malicious attacks. My brain is wired to identify threats, isolate them, and systematically dismantle them until nothing remains. I did not shed a single tear. The warm maternal instinct inside me was instantly replaced by an ice-cold, calculated void. I stood up and gently guided Zoe to the living room couch. I pulled a soft blanket over her trembling shoulders and kissed her forehead. "I need you to stay right here," I told her softly. "Turn on your favorite cartoon. I will be back very soon." I did not wait for her to answer. I walked straight to the entryway table. I did not text my husband. I did not call the police. I picked up my car keys and walked out the front door, closing it quietly behind me. The engine of my car roared to life, matching the silent, devastating storm brewing in my veins. I stepped back from Trish, leaving her frozen in the middle of her pristine living room. The fake smile had completely melted off her face, replaced by a sudden flash of genuine alarm. She opened her mouth to speak, but I did not wait to hear whatever pathetic defense she was going to formulate. I turned on my heel and walked out the heavy front doors exactly the way I had come in. My posture was straight and my steps were deliberate. I got into my car and carefully placed the tangled, ruined braids on the passenger seat next to me. They sat there like physical evidence of a crime scene. The drive back to our house felt even shorter than the drive there. My mind was already running simulations, executing a step-by-step protocol to neutralize the threat. When I walked through my front door, Zoe was exactly where I had left her. She was curled into a tight ball on the couch, the soft blanket pulled up to her chin, her eyes swollen and red from crying. She looked so small and so incredibly vulnerable. I walked over and kissed the top of her head. I told her she was safe and that nobody would ever touch her again. Then I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. The operator answered almost immediately. I kept my voice perfectly level and professional as I reported the incident. I stated clearly that an adult female had physically restrained my 10-year-old daughter and forcibly cut off her hair without parental consent, constituting child battery and assault. I provided Trisha's name and her address in Buckhead. Just as the dispatcher was confirming the details, the front door of our house flew open. Derek stormed inside. His face was twisted in a mixture of panic and rage. Trish must have called him the second I left her house, crying wolf and playing the victim to her little brother. Derek did not even look at our daughter trembling on the couch. He did not ask Zoe if she was okay. His eyes locked onto me and the phone in my hand. He lunged across the living room and snatched the phone right out of my grip. He looked at the screen, saw the emergency number, and hurriedly pressed the end call button. "What is wrong with you?" he yelled, his voice echoing off the walls and making Zoe flinch. "Are you out of your mind, Vanessa? Trish just called me having a total panic attack. She said you barged into her house, embarrassed her in front of her friends, and threatened her. And now you are calling the police on my sister." I stood my ground, looking at the man I had married. "Give me my phone back, Derek," I said coldly. "Your sister assaulted our daughter." She held her down and hacked off her hair because she thought it looked too ghetto for her precious country club aesthetic. She threw her hair in the trash. "That is battery." Derek ran a hand over his face, groaning in frustration. He paced back and forth, completely ignoring the physical proof of his daughter's trauma. "You are being completely unreasonable," he snapped. "Trish was just trying to help. You know how she is about appearances. She wants Zoe to look neat and polished. She was doing the kid a favor, so she fits in better with Preston's crowd. You know how important this spa launch is to her and to our family. You cannot just go throwing around words like assault and calling the cops over a haircut. It is just hair, Vanessa. It grows back. Do not blow this out of proportion." I stared at him. I really looked at him perhaps for the first time in our entire marriage. This was my husband, a man who proudly wore designer suits paid for by my salary, a man whose entire lifestyle, his luxury car, his country club memberships, his ability to rub elbows with his wealthy brother-in-law, was entirely funded by the cybersecurity career I built from the ground up. I had supported this man financially and emotionally for 7 years while he chased promotions he never quite earned. And here he was standing in our living room, defending the woman who had just terrorized and mutilated our child. He was demanding that his daughter swallow her humiliation and trauma, just so his sister could maintain her pristine social image. He was terrified of Trish and Preston. He was terrified of losing his proximity to their wealth. He was willing to sacrifice his own child's dignity on the altar of his family's fragile ego. "Are you seriously defending her?" I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet, but it carried the weight of an absolute finality. "You are standing there looking at your daughter who is hiding under a blanket because she feels ugly and violated, and you are telling me it is just a haircut. You are telling me that your sister's luxury spa brand is more important than your child's physical safety and emotional well-being." Derek sighed heavily, taking on a condescending tone, as if he were trying to reason with an irrational person. "Look, Vanessa, I am not saying Trish went about it the right way. She should have asked you first. But you are escalating this to a level that is going to destroy our family. If you press charges, Preston will be furious. He will cut me off from the investment network I need for my business. You are acting like a crazy person. You need to calm down, drop this police nonsense, and apologize to Trish for storming into her house and ruining her tea party. We have to keep the peace." Keep the peace. Those 4 words hung in the empty space between us. For years I had kept the peace. I had smiled politely at family dinners when his mother made backhanded comments about my career. I had bit my tongue when Trish flaunted her wealth while I quietly paid off Derek's credit card debts behind closed doors. I had made myself small to make him feel big. I had compromised my own comfort to accommodate his desperate need for his family's approval. But looking at him now, I felt absolutely nothing. The love, the frustration, the desire to make our marriage work, it all evaporated instantly. In its place was a sterile, calculating void. He was not a partner. He was a liability. He was a coward who would throw his own flesh and blood to the wolves just to keep a seat at a table where he was not even respected. I did not argue with him. I did not scream or throw things. I simply held out my hand. "Give me my phone, Derek." He looked at my outstretched hand, hesitating for a moment. He thought my silence meant I was backing down. He thought his manipulative little speech had worked. He handed the phone back with a self-satisfied nod. "Good," he said, adjusting his collar. "Just let it go, Vanessa. I will talk to Trish later and smooth things over. We will get Zoe a nice headband or something until it grows out. It is not the end of the world." He turned around and walked toward the kitchen, opening the refrigerator to look for a drink as if nothing had happened. He had completely dismissed the trauma in the room. He had chosen his side. I walked over to the couch and sat next to Zoe. I pulled her into my arms, resting my chin on top of the heavy beanie she still refused to take off. I could feel the rapid beating of her heart against my chest. She was listening to everything her father had just said. She had heard the man who was supposed to be her ultimate protector tell her that her pain was an overreaction, that her tears were an inconvenience, and that her aunt's social media aesthetic was worth more than her physical autonomy. "Do not listen to him," I whispered softly into her ear, making sure my voice was steady and comforting. "You did nothing wrong. You are perfect, and nobody has the right to touch you. I promise you nobody will ever get away with hurting you. Not ever again." Derek walked back into the living room holding a bottle of sparkling water. He took a long sip, completely oblivious to the gravity of the moment. So he said casually, "What are we doing for dinner?" "I was thinking we could order from that Italian place. We need to wind down and get back to normal." Normal. His definition of normal was swallowing abuse and pretending it tasted like respect. I looked at the imported Italian leather shoes on his feet. I looked at the expensive watch on his wrist, all paid for by the bonuses I earned designing security architectures for global financial institutions. He was a man playing dress-up, relying on my hard work, while simultaneously demanding I bow down to the sister who despised me. I did not answer his question about dinner. I stood up and walked past him, grabbing my laptop from the kitchen island. I did not need to raise my voice. The decision was already made. The timeline was already established in my mind. Derek thought he had successfully managed a hysterical wife. He thought he had preserved his standing with his wealthy brother-in-law. He thought tomorrow would be just another day, where I went to work to fund his lifestyle, while his family continued to walk all over us. He was so incredibly blind. He had just drawn a line in the sand and placed himself firmly on the other side. He had chosen to be collateral damage in the war I was about to unleash. I closed my laptop, feeling the cool metal under my fingertips. The tears were gone. The shock was gone. I was a woman operating purely on logic and vengeance. I looked at the husband I had supported for 7 years, and I knew with absolute certainty that by the time I was finished with his family, he would have absolutely nothing left. The summons came the very next afternoon. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, demanded our presence for a mandatory family dinner. Derek framed it in the car ride over as an olive branch, a simple chance to clear the air and move past the unfortunate misunderstanding. I agreed to go. I did not agree to apologize. I had hired a trusted private nanny to stay at our house, ensuring Zoe was absolutely safe, and explicitly instructed her not to open the door for anyone under any circumstances. I rode in stifling silence beside my husband to his mother's sprawling estate, letting him fill the quiet with nervous chatter about how I needed to be the bigger person today. Beatrice lived in a gaudy, oversized mansion, paid for entirely by Preston's banking connections and Trish's incessant need to project generational wealth. The moment I crossed the threshold, the hostility was palpable. The air conditioning was set freezing cold, but the glares directed at me from across the grand foyer were colder. I was ushered into the formal dining room and directed to a single chair at the far end of the long mahogany table. It was deliberately positioned to make me feel isolated and small. It was the sinner's seat. Trish was already seated across from me, clutching a monogrammed linen handkerchief. Her eyes were artificially red and she was leaning heavily against Preston, who patted her shoulder with an expression of aristocratic long-suffering. Beatrice stood at the head of the table, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her designer jewelry glinting under the harsh light of the crystal chandelier. Derek immediately scuttled over to stand near his mother, physically and symbolically separating himself from me. The battle lines were drawn. "I hope you are ready to explain your atrocious behavior, Vanessa." Beatrice began without a single word of greeting. Her voice was sharp and accusatory, echoing off the high ceilings. "Storming into your sister-in-law's home like some unhinged hoodlum, screaming threats in front of prominent community members. Do you have any idea how much damage you have done to this family's reputation today?" I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. My posture was perfectly straight. I did not blink. I was not looking at a family. I was looking at a coordinated threat group executing a well-practiced social engineering tactic. "I noticed you did not ask how your granddaughter is doing." "Beatrice?" I replied, my voice calm and perfectly modulated. "I noticed nobody in this room has mentioned that a 10-year-old child was physically restrained and had her hair hacked off against her will." Trish let out a loud theatrical sob, pressing the handkerchief to her completely dry eyes. "That is a complete lie," she wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured trauma. "I never restrained her. I was trying to do something nice for her. I wanted the girls to look polished for the spa promotional photos. I offered to trim her split ends, but Zoe started throwing a massive tantrum. She was thrashing around in the salon chair, screaming and kicking like a wild animal. The scissors slipped because she jerked her head away. It was a complete accident. I was horrified, but before I could even explain, you came barging into my sanctuary like a lunatic." It was a masterful performance. If I had not seen the malicious chopped chunks of hair or heard the pure, unadulterated devastation in my daughter's voice, I might have believed the sheer conviction in Trish's lie. I watched her carefully, analyzing her micro-expressions. I noted the way her breathing remained entirely steady, despite the dramatic heaving of her shoulders. I saw the briefest flash of a smug smirk cross her lips when she buried her face in Preston's designer suit jacket. Just then, Kendall wandered into the dining room holding a tablet, The 10-year-old gave me a nasty superior glare that entirely mirrored her mother's behavior before Preston gently shooed her away into the east wing of the house. "She is a child," Beatrice snapped, pointing a heavily ringed finger at me. "Children throw tantrums and accidents happen. You do not call the police on your own flesh and blood over a bad haircut. You do not humiliate my daughter in her own home." Trish has been crying all night long. Her grand opening event is this weekend, and she is terrified you are going to show up and cause a scene. "You have always been difficult, Vanessa. You think because you make a decent salary, you are above our traditions. You are completely out of control." I looked at Derek. He was staring down at his expensive shoes, nodding along with every single word his mother said. He was fully endorsing this fabricated reality. He was actively participating in the character assassination of his own child just to protect his sister's vanity. "Your launch event," I said, addressing Trish directly, ignoring the pathetic excuse of a husband standing across the room. "You chopped off my daughter's braids, threw them in a trash can, and called her Heritage Ghetto so she would fit the sterile aesthetic of your commercial brand. You did not trim split ends. You assaulted her." Preston cleared his throat. It was the distinct sound of old money privilege demanding absolute obedience. As a white banking executive who had married into the family, he always acted as the ultimate authority figure in the room. He adjusted his silk tie and looked down his nose at me with a gaze so condescending it bordered on clinical. "Let us manage our emotions," Vanessa Preston said, his tone slow and patronizing, as if speaking to an unruly subordinate. "We are civilized people. We belong to a certain tier of society, and in our world, we do not resort to hysterical outbursts. We do not dial 911 to settle domestic disagreements. We handle things privately, with absolute discretion. You clearly lack the emotional regulation required to understand the nuances of this situation." Trish made a minor error in judgment during a stressful moment, and the child overreacted. "Your disproportionate response, however, is unacceptable. We expect you to issue a formal apology to Trish for your disruptive behavior, and we expect you to conduct yourself with the grace appropriate for members of this family moving forward." The sheer audacity of his lecture hung heavily in the dead silence of the dining room. He was attempting to weaponize his class status to invalidate my daughter's trauma. He genuinely believed that because his family possessed generational wealth, they were immune to basic human decency and the law. They all stared at me, waiting for the inevitable submission they had grown so accustomed to extracting from me over the last 7 years. They expected me to lower my head, swallow my pride, and apologize to the woman who had terrorized my child. I looked at Preston. I looked at Trish clutching her dry handkerchief. I looked at Beatrice with her arms crossed in righteous indignation. And finally, I stared at the husband I had financially supported for the last 7 years, realizing he was nothing but a spineless coward clinging to his family's coattails. The fracture of our marriage officially began. I did not lower my gaze. I did not shrink back into the heavy mahogany chair. Instead, I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, with the absolute precision of a predator sizing up its prey. I looked at Preston first, dismantling his aristocratic facade with a single razor-sharp smile. "Civilized people," I repeated, letting the syllables roll off my tongue like a lethal injection. "Is that what we are calling it, Preston?" Because civilized is not the word I would use to describe a woman who conveniently tripped and spilled an entire glass of vintage red wine down my custom silk gown mere minutes before I stepped on stage to accept a corporate industry award last winter. "You claimed your designer heel caught on the rug, Trish. Funny how your clumsiness only flares up when someone else is the center of attention." Trish dropped the monogrammed handkerchief from her face. The fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by a vicious defensive glare that cracked her elegant mask wide open. "I have no idea what you are talking about," she snapped, her voice shrill and grating. "You are bringing up ancient history to deflect from your own psychotic behavior today." I did not stop. I did not raise my voice. I turned my attention to Beatrice, who was bristling at the head of the table. "And let us talk about family traditions, Beatrice. Let us talk about the tradition of buying your biological granddaughter Kendall a miniature designer handbag for Christmas, while handing my Zoe a clearance rack sweater that was 2 sizes too small with the discount tag still attached. You called it being practical because children outgrow things so fast. Yet Kendall receives custom jewelry and private tennis lessons. The systemic prejudice and blatant favoritism in this family are not accidents. They are calculated, malicious choices meant to remind my child that her biracial heritage makes her a second-class citizen in your eyes. The dining room erupted. Beatrice slammed her heavily ringed hand against the table, her face turning a mottled shade of crimson. "How dare you speak to us this way in my own house?" she shrieked, discarding all pretenses of upper-class grace. "After everything we have accepted you for. We gave you a place at this table, Vanessa. We allowed you into our circle. You did not give me a place." I shot back, my voice slicing through the chaotic room with glacial authority. "I bought my place. I bought the very tailored suit your son is wearing right now. I paid the exorbitant credit card bills that kept Derek afloat while he was busy trying to impress all of you with wealth he does not possess. I am the financial backbone of the luxurious life he pretends to live." That was the breaking point. Derek leaped out of his chair, his face contorted with absolute rage and blistering humiliation. He slammed his fist down onto the heavy mahogany table, making the crystal water glasses vibrate violently. "That is enough, Vanessa," he roared. "You are completely out of line. You do not get to come into my mother's house, disrespect my sister, and emasculate me in front of my family. You will apologize to Trish right now. You will apologize to my mother, and you will shut your mouth so we can fix this mess and keep the peace. Do you hear me? Apologize immediately." I looked up at the man shouting at me. His veins were popping out of his neck. His fists were clenched tightly at his sides. He was so small, so utterly insignificant. I did not scream back. I did not cry. I simply stared at him. It was the terrifying dead silence of a woman whose love had entirely run dry. The final frayed thread tethering me to this pathetic excuse for a marriage cleanly snapped. I stood up from the chair, smoothing the front of my trousers with agonizing slowness. I did not offer a single word of apology. I did not say goodbye to Beatrice or Preston. I turned around and walked out of the dining room, leaving them choking on their own toxic fumes. The drive back to my house was perfectly calm. The fiery rage from earlier had solidified into pure cold strategy. When I walked through the front door, the house was blissfully quiet. The private nanny I hired was reading a book on the living room couch. I thanked her, paid her a generous cash bonus, and sent her home for the night. Zoe was fast asleep in her bed, the heavy winter beanie resting on her nightstand, as a sickening reminder of the assault. I walked into my master bedroom and pulled a large suitcase from the highest shelf of the walk-in closet. I did not pack frantically. I folded my clothes with meticulous, methodical care. I packed Zoe's favorite toys, her school uniforms, and the beautiful dresses I had bought her. I gathered all my important documents, my encrypted hard drives, and my personal jewelry. Derek arrived home exactly 1 hour later. I heard him stumbling through the front door, muttering angrily under his breath. He stomped directly into the guest bedroom, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. He was throwing a tantrum, expecting me to come crawling to him with a tearful apology by morning. He truly believed that giving me the silent treatment would break my resolve and force me back into submission. He crawled into the guest bed and fell fast asleep, blissfully unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. I finished zipping the last suitcase. I walked into Zoe's room, gently wrapping her in a warm fleece blanket, and lifted her into my arms. She stirred slightly, murmuring my name, but did not wake. I carried my daughter out to the garage, loaded the heavy suitcases into the trunk of my SUV, and strapped her safely into her car seat. I did not leave a dramatic note on the kitchen counter. I did not leave my wedding ring on the dining table. I simply closed the door on that chapter of my life, forever. I drove straight into the glittering heart of downtown Atlanta. 30 minutes later, I pulled into the highly secured private underground parking garage of an ultra-luxury high-rise building. The overnight concierge greeted me respectfully by name, immediately rushing over to assist with the luggage. We rode the private keycard elevator all the way up to the top floor. The steel doors opened directly into a sprawling modern penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the breathtaking city skyline. This property was one of the many high-yield assets I held quietly under my corporate holding company. It was completely untouched by Derek and entirely unknown to his greedy, status-obsessed family. I laid Zoe in a massive plush bed, pulling the crisp white duvet over her shoulders. She was finally safe in an environment that matched her true worth, far away from the poison of her aunt's vanity. The next morning, the sun rose over the Atlanta skyline, casting a brilliant golden light across the penthouse living room. Miles away in the suburbs, Derek would soon wake up in a hollow, empty house. He would find empty closets, no wife, no daughter, and a brutal reality check he was completely unprepared for. Meanwhile, I sat at the sleek marble kitchen island sipping a cup of black coffee. I booted up my encrypted laptop, entering my multi-factor authentication credentials. The screen illuminated my face with a cool blue glow. The time for arguing was over. I opened my central server matrix and began initiating the protocol to tear their fraudulent empire down to the ground. The machine of my revenge was officially roaring to life. The machine of my revenge was officially roaring to life. I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out the small pastel-colored smartwatch I had unbuckled from Zoe's wrist last night. To anyone else, it looked like a standard children's tracking device used by overly cautious parents to monitor locations. But I am a senior cybersecurity architect. I do not rely on factory settings. When Zoe was diagnosed with mild generalized anxiety 2 years ago, I wrote and installed a custom daemon into the watch's operating system. I programmed it so that if her heart rate ever spiked beyond 120 beats per minute for more than 60 seconds, the device would silently activate its microphone and begin recording high-definition ambient audio, syncing the encrypted files directly to my private offshore cloud server. I connected the watch to my terminal via a secure data cable and accessed the server logs. The system flagged a severe biometric anomaly recorded yesterday afternoon at exactly 3:14. Zoe's heart rate had skyrocketed to 145 beats per minute and remained there for over 8 minutes. My jaw clenched so tightly my teeth ached, but my hands remained perfectly steady as I downloaded the encrypted audio file. I plugged in my noise-canceling studio headphones. I needed to hear every single detail. I pressed play. The recording started with the muffled ambient noise of a salon environment. Then came Trish's voice. It was not the refined, cultured tone she meticulously practiced for Preston's elite banking friends. It was a vicious, guttural sneer dripping with malicious prejudice. "Stop squirming, you little brat!" Trish hissed, her voice captured with crystal clarity. "I am trying to fix this ghetto mess on your head." I heard Zoe whimper softly, begging her aunt to stop explaining that I had spent hours braiding her hair and that she loved it. The response was the sickening metallic snip of heavy styling scissors. "You look like a street urchin," Trish spat, her tone laced with absolute disgust. "You are embarrassing me. If you want to be seen in my luxury spa, you need to look like you actually belong in civilized society. Not like some unwashed mistake your mother dragged in. Sit still or I will cut it shorter." In the background, another voice chimed in. It was Kendall, laughing a cruel, high-pitched giggle as she watched her cousin being terrorized. "Look at her crying over garbage hair," Kendall mocked. The sound of the scissors continued, relentless and violent, accompanied by Zoe's escalating panicked sobs. The recording lasted for 9 agonizing minutes. 9 minutes of my daughter being verbally abused, racially degraded, and physically violated by her own aunt. I took off the headphones. The silence of the penthouse pressed against my ears. I did not shatter a glass or scream into the void. I isolated the audio track, ran it through a vocal enhancement algorithm to remove background noise, and duplicated the file. I embedded the pristine recording into 5 separate encrypted vaults spread across global servers. The ironclad proof was locked, loaded, and indestructible. Trish had just handed me the murder weapon with her fingerprints all over it. An hour later, Zoe woke up. The terror from yesterday still lingered in her eyes when she realized we were not in our suburban house, but the luxurious surroundings of the penthouse quickly distracted her. I ordered an extravagant room service breakfast featuring Belgian waffles and fresh fruit. I sat beside her, running my hands soothingly over her back. "You are not going to school today," I told her gently, "and you are not going back to that house. I have arranged for a highly vetted private tutor to come here and do some fun art projects with you. You are perfectly safe." Once the tutor arrived, I retreated to the master suite to prepare for work. For 7 years, I had deliberately dulled my shine. I wore modest off-the-rack clothing and downplayed my corporate status so Derek would never feel emasculated by his wife's success. That pathetic masquerade ended today. I opened the expansive walk-in closet and selected a razor-sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit I had purchased in London. I paired it with a crisp silk blouse, jet black stilettos, and a platinum luxury watch that cost more than Derek's entire annual salary. I applied my makeup with military precision, creating a look that was fierce, untouchable, and radiating absolute power. I drove my sleek European sports car out of the underground garage and headed straight into the bustling financial district of Atlanta. I pulled up to a towering Class A glass skyscraper that housed the most elite tech firms in the state. The valet immediately rushed over to open my door, greeting me with utmost deference. The security personnel in the marble lobby stood a little straighter as I walked past. "Good morning, Ms. Washington," the head of security said respectfully, tapping his earpiece to authorize my private elevator access. I stepped into the elevator and rode it to the top floor. The steel doors slid open to reveal the sprawling, immaculate offices of Aegis Cyber Solutions. I was not just an IT worker sitting in a cubicle fixing firewall glitches. I was a senior partner and the lead cybersecurity architect for the entire southeastern seaboard. Fortune 500 CEOs waited months just to get a 30-minute consultation with me. The stark contrast between the way my toxic in-laws treated me like dirt on their shoes and the way the corporate elite bowed to my expertise was almost comical. I walked past the rows of junior analysts and entered my massive corner office, which featured panoramic floor-to-ceiling views of the entire city. I locked the frosted glass door behind me. I bypassed my standard work computer and booted up a separate, highly classified terminal hidden in my desk drawer. This terminal accessed the private wealth management platform of my personal LLC. Derek believed our joint checking account was the extent of our wealth. He had no idea that I had spent years quietly funneling my massive corporate bonuses into commercial real estate acquisitions, masking my identity behind layers of corporate shielding. I opened my digital real estate portfolio, watching the numbers populate on the screen. My eyes scanned past the residential properties and landed squarely on the commercial acquisitions tab. I clicked the folder containing my most recent and most lethal investment. The trap was already set. It was time to spring it. Tell me if you are ready for the next part. The trap was already set. It was time to spring it. Back in the sprawling suburban house that my paycheck afforded, Derek was just waking up. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the guest bedroom where he had thrown his pathetic tantrum the night before. I knew exactly how his mind worked. He stretched, expecting to smell freshly brewed coffee and hear the sounds of me preparing breakfast. He genuinely believed that a night of the silent treatment would break my spirit. He thought I would be sitting at the kitchen island ready to offer a tearful apology for embarrassing his precious sister and mother. He thought his position as the man of the house was absolute. He dragged himself out of bed and walked down the hallway, adjusting his expensive silk pajama pants. The silence of the house must have felt incredibly heavy to him. There was no television playing morning cartoons for Zoe. There was no sound of the shower running. He called out my name, his voice carrying that familiar tone of arrogant expectation. When he received no answer, he pushed open the door to the master suite. I can only imagine the sheer drop in his stomach when he saw the perfectly made bed and the wide-open doors of my walk-in closet. The shelves that once held my designer suits and custom jewelry were completely bare. He rushed into Zoe's room and found the exact same terrifying emptiness. Her favorite books, her school uniforms, her stuffed animals, they were all gone. The only thing left behind was a profound, echoing silence. Panic is a fascinating emotion to observe in a coward. Derek pulled out his phone and dialed my number. It went straight to a disconnected tone because I had already wiped my personal device and switched entirely to an encrypted corporate line. He tried calling the private nanny, but her number was blocked as well. He stood in the middle of a massive, expensive house that he could not afford to maintain for a single month on his own salary. The brutal reality of his situation crashed down on him. He had chosen to defend Trish's vanity over his daughter's safety, and in doing so, he had thrown away his entire financial foundation. His luxury car, his country club, dues, his tailored suits, they were all about to disappear. He was completely alone. While Derek was drowning in the realization of his monumental failure, I was sitting in my glass-walled office downtown, executing a flawless legal strike. I stared at the high-resolution monitor, displaying the commercial lease agreement for the Magnolia complex. This was the premier retail location in Atlanta, featuring high-end boutiques and exclusive wellness centers. It was also the exact location where Trish had recently signed a 10-year lease to open her highly anticipated luxury spa. She had been bragging about securing the spot for months, telling everyone in her social circle that she had passed a rigorous vetting process by a mysterious foreign investment group. That mysterious foreign investment group was a subsidiary holding company entirely owned and operated by me. I was Trish's landlord. I owned the walls, the floors, the plumbing, and the very ground her arrogant feet walked on. I scrolled through the digital lease agreement, highlighting a specific clause buried deep within the 50-page document. It was a standard morality and ethical conduct clause. It explicitly stated that the landlord retained the right to immediately terminate the lease and execute a 48-hour eviction if the tenant engaged in any criminal activity, physical assault, or gross ethical violations that could damage the reputation of the commercial property. Stripping a 10-year-old child of her hair against her will and hurling racist abuse certainly qualified as a gross ethical violation. I picked up my secure desk phone and initiated a conference call. Within 20 minutes, two of the most ruthless attorneys in Atlanta walked into my corner office. One was a powerhouse litigator specializing in commercial real estate disputes. The other was a former federal prosecutor who now dominated the field of child advocacy and criminal injury law. I did not offer them small talk. I simply turned my monitor around and hit play on the audio file I had extracted from Zoe's smartwatch. The two lawyers listened in dead silence. They heard Trish's venomous voice degrading my daughter. They heard the horrifying sound of the scissors. They heard the terrified sobbing of an innocent child. When the recording ended, the criminal attorney slowly took off her glasses. Her expression was a mixture of absolute disgust and predatory focus. That is battery child endangerment and potentially a hate crime based on the specific language used, she stated, her voice devoid of any warmth. We have her dead to rights, Vanessa. The audio is pristine, and the smartwatch telemetry proves the child was in a state of severe physiological distress. I can have an arrest warrant drafted and fast-tracked through a judge by tomorrow. I nodded, shifting my gaze to the real estate attorney. I handed him the printed commercial lease agreement for the Magnolia complex and the eviction I asked. He scanned the highlighted morality clause, tapping his expensive pen against the mahogany table. With a pending criminal charge of child battery verified by this audio evidence, this lease is effectively toilet paper. I can draft an immediate notice to vacate. She will have exactly 48 hours to remove her equipment from your property, or it will be seized and liquidated to cover breach of contract penalties. I leaned back in my leather executive chair, feeling a dark, cold satisfaction settle deep within my bones. Trish had spent her entire adult life curating a fake image of grace and superiority. She believed she was untouchable because her husband worked in a bank and she drank tea with wealthy socialites. She thought cutting my daughter's hair would force us into submission. She had no idea that I held the keys to her entire kingdom. Draft the papers, I instructed, my voice echoing with icy authority. But do not file them yet. Trish is hosting her grand opening event this coming weekend. She has invited every major financial partner of Preston's Bank to show off her new spa. She wants an audience. I'm going to make sure she gets a spectacular show. I want the eviction notice and the arrest warrant ready to be served exactly when she steps up to the microphone. The lawyers exchanged a look of pure professional admiration before nodding in agreement. They packed up their briefcases, knowing they were about to execute one of the most brutal legal takedowns of their careers. As they left my office, I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. My phone vibrated on the desk. It was an email notification. Derek had desperately emailed my corporate account begging me to come home and talk to him. I highlighted his message and dragged it straight to the digital trash bin. The time for talking had ended the night they chose to protect a monster over a child. The game piece was on the board, and checkmate was only days away. The days leading up to the grand opening were a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. My encrypted phone, which I kept strictly for monitoring the family group chat, lit up incessantly. Trish was flooding the channel with updates about her spectacular luxury spa launch. She posted photos of imported Italian marble reception desks and towering arrangements of white orchids. Preston chimed in every few hours, boasting about the elite executives from his bank who had RSVP'd. He claimed this event would cement his promotion to senior vice president. Then came the message I had been waiting for. Trish tagged Derek in the chat. "I hope your lovely wife has finally calmed down from her little episode, Derek. The grand opening is this Saturday. Preston's boss will be there, so please make sure Vanessa leaves her funeral face at home. If she behaves, I might even let my stylists give Zoe a complimentary hair rescue treatment. We want her looking presentable for the family photos." The sheer audacity of her offering to fix the trauma she inflicted was nauseating, but it confirmed exactly what I needed to know. She felt utterly untouchable. She believed she had won. Derek responded with a thumbs-up emoji. He was still trying to locate me. I had ignored his emails and blocked his calls, but he was desperate. His luxury vehicle lease was due, his credit cards were maxed out, and he needed his personal ATM to return home. He found me on Thursday evening. I was walking out of my corporate building heading toward my private parking garage when he stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He looked frantic, his designer suit slightly wrinkled. He had clearly been waiting for hours in the sweltering Atlanta heat. "Vanessa," he gasped, rushing toward me with an outstretched hand. I stepped back smoothly, putting a calculated distance between us. His hand dropped to his side. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his tone shifting from relief to his usual arrogant annoyance. "You completely vanished. I have been worried sick. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have my mother asking why my wife ran away like a teenager throwing a tantrum?" I looked at him, analyzing the pathetic desperation in his eyes. "You are not worried about me, Derek," I said, my voice perfectly level. "You are worried about your American Express bill. It auto-drafts tomorrow and you do not have the funds to cover your golf club fees." He flushed a dark, ugly red. "That is not fair. I am your husband. We need to go home and fix this. Trish's grand opening is in 2 days. You saw the group chat, right? She is offering an olive branch. She is willing to give Zoe a free hair restoration package. You just need to show up, smile, and not embarrass me in front of Preston's boss. Is that too much to ask to keep our family together?" He was genuinely trying to use his sister's abuse as a bargaining chip. He wanted me to parade my traumatized daughter in front of her attacker to secure his social standing. I did not scream at him. I did not slap him across the face. Instead, I let a soft, gentle smile curve my lips. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth, but it was exactly what he needed to see. "Okay, Derek," I whispered softly. "If it is that important to you, Zoe and I will attend the grand opening. We will be there right on time." The relief that washed over his face was immediate and absolute. He let out a long breath, adjusting his tie with renewed arrogance. "I knew you would see reason," he said, offering a smug, condescending grin. "I will see you at the house tomorrow so we can ride together." "No," I replied, maintaining my placid smile. "Zoe and I have preparations to make. We will meet you at the venue." He agreed eagerly, too thrilled by his perceived victory to question my logistics. He turned and walked away, genuinely believing he had tamed his hysterical wife. He thought I had finally submitted to his family's hierarchy. He had no idea he was just the sacrificial pawn in a much larger game. Friday morning was dedicated entirely to my daughter's metamorphosis. I did not take Zoe to a standard mall salon. I booked a private session at the most exclusive celebrity styling studio in Atlanta. I sat beside her, holding her hand, as a master stylist carefully assessed the jagged, uneven mess Trish had left behind. The stylist was a kind, empathetic woman who treated Zoe like absolute royalty. She did not ask invasive questions, but she worked with precision and care. Over the course of 2 hours, the ruined, chopped locks were expertly transformed into a fierce, incredibly chic pixie cut. It framed Zoe's delicate face, perfectly highlighting her high cheekbones and beautiful dark eyes. When the stylist turned the chair around to face the mirror, Zoe gasped. A slow, genuine smile broke across her face for the first time in days. She did not look like a victim. She looked radiant, proud, and undeniably powerful. Next, we visited a high-end boutique. I bypassed the frilly childish dresses and selected a stunning tailored designer outfit for her. It was sophisticated and striking. For myself, I bypassed traditional evening wear. I chose a razor-sharp crimson power suit with a tailored waist and a plunging neckline. I paired it with sleek stilettos and minimalist diamond jewelry. We were not dressing to fit into Trisha's pretentious country club aesthetic. We were dressing to conquer it. Saturday evening arrived carrying the heavy humidity of a Georgia summer. The Magnolia complex was buzzing with activity. Valets rushed to park a steady stream of luxury sedans and sports cars. A red carpet led directly to the entrance of Trisha's new establishment. Photographers from local lifestyle magazines flashed their cameras, capturing the arrival of Atlanta's banking and social elite. I pulled my sleek sports car up to the valet stand. The attendant rushed to open the door. I stepped out, my crimson suit commanding instant attention. I reached into the passenger seat and took Zoe's hand. She stepped out beside me, her new pixie cut shining, her chin held high. We walked up the red carpet together, our heels clicking in perfect unison. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the spa, I could see Trish holding court. She wore a sparkling emerald gown, clutching a glass of champagne, laughing loudly at a joke Preston's boss had just made. Derek stood nearby, hovering awkwardly at the edge of the circle, trying desperately to look like he belonged. Beatrice was seated on a velvet lounge chair, beaming with pride at her golden child's apparent success. I pushed the heavy glass doors open. The ambient classical music and the low hum of wealthy chatter filled the room. The scent of expensive floral arrangements hung heavy in the air. Several heads turned toward the entrance, drawn by our striking presence. Trisha's eyes locked onto mine. Her smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she registered that I was not wearing the apologetic, submissive expression she expected. She noticed Zoe's fierce new haircut, and her jaw tightened in absolute irritation. Trish handed her champagne glass to a waiter and began marching toward us, her heels striking the polished marble floor. She was preparing to deliver a venomous greeting, preparing to put me in my place in front of her elite audience. But I did not flinch. I gave her an ice-cold, unblinking smile. Today we were going to teach them what real elegance and absolute ruin looked like. I stepped out of my sleek sports car and handed the keys to the valet. "Good morning, Ms. Washington," he said, his tone deferential. I gave him a curt nod and walked into the towering glass and steel structure that housed Aegis Cyber Solutions. This was my domain. The air here was sharp-conditioned and smelled of wealth and efficiency, a stark contrast to the suffocating performative atmosphere of Beatrice's dining room. As I crossed the expansive marble lobby, the head of security, a former Marine named Davis, straightened his posture. "Good morning, Ms. Washington. Clear for the private lift." He tapped his earpiece and the velvet-roped elevator doors slid open immediately. I stepped inside alone, the polished chrome reflecting my transformation. I was no longer the quiet, accommodating wife who wore off-the-rack clothes to stroke her husband's fragile ego. I wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit from Savile Row, black stilettos that echoed with lethal precision, and a platinum watch that cost more than Derek's entire annual salary. I was a senior partner and the lead cybersecurity architect for the entire southeastern seaboard. The elevator chimed softly, opening to the top floor. The moment I stepped out, the entire floor seemed to collectively hold its breath. Junior analysts paused their typing, and senior executives offered respectful nods as I walked past. I was not just an IT worker, as Trish loved to sneer. I designed the security architectures that protected billions of dollars in assets for global financial institutions. Fortune 500 CEOs waited months for a 30-minute consultation with me. The irony of my in-laws who worshipped money and status treating me like dirt while the true corporate elite bowed to my expertise was a bitter comedy I had tolerated for far too long. I reached my massive corner office, which boasted panoramic floor-to-ceiling views of the Atlanta skyline. I locked the frosted glass door behind me, sealing myself in a fortress of absolute silence. I ignored my standard workstation. Instead, I opened a concealed drawer and booted up a separate, highly classified terminal. This machine bypassed standard company servers, connecting directly to the private wealth management platform of my personal holding company. Derek believed our joint checking account was the extent of our wealth. He believed his leased luxury car and his country club dues were the pinnacle of success. He had absolutely no idea that for the past 7 years, I had quietly funneled my massive corporate bonuses, speaking fees, and stock options into commercial real estate acquisitions. I masked my identity behind layers of corporate shielding operating through a series of anonymous LLCs. I logged into the platform, the screen illuminating my face with a cold blue light. I watched the numbers populate across the screen. My net worth was staggering, a figure that would make Preston's old money jaw drop. But I wasn't interested in the raw numbers today. I navigated past my residential properties and clicked directly on the Commercial Acquisitions tab. I opened the folder containing my most recent and arguably most strategic investment. The trap was already set. It was time to examine the mechanism. The trap was already set. It was time to examine the mechanism. I clicked open the master file labeled The Magnolia Complex. For weeks, Trish had been insufferably vocal in the family group chats about her upcoming grand opening. She treated her new luxury spa as the ultimate monument to her manufactured elite status. She constantly bragged about securing the premier corner unit in the most coveted commercial retail space in all of Buckhead. According to her, she had beaten out dozens of high-profile competitors because her business plan was simply flawless and her aesthetic was unmatched. She claimed she had survived a brutal vetting process conducted by an exclusive foreign investment group that only accepted the absolute best. What she did not know was that the foreign investment group was a corporate phantom. It was a perfectly constructed labyrinth of shell companies registered in Delaware and routed through a holding firm in the Cayman Islands. And sitting at the absolute top of that financial pyramid, pulling every single string, was me. Exactly 34 days ago, my primary real estate LLC executed a quiet all-cash buyout of the Magnolia Complex. It was a highly lucrative acquisition on its own merit, but the real prize was the tenant roster. When I saw Trish's business application cross my desk during the transition period, I almost laughed at the sheer mathematical probability of it all. Preston had leveraged his banking connections to secure her business loan, but Trish had demanded to handle the real estate negotiations herself to prove her independence. She was negotiating with a ghost. My legal team had handled all the communication, presenting the facade of a faceless international board of directors. We approved her lease. We took her substantial security deposit. We handed her the keys to her glass-walled sanctuary. I was her landlord. I owned the imported Italian marble floors she walked on. I owned the crystal-clear windows she stared out of. I owned the very roof over her arrogant head. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany desk, and began pulling up her specific tenant file. Trish had spared no expense building out her sanctuary of vanity. I reviewed the financial disclosures she was required to submit during the application process. It was a fascinating read. Despite Preston's old money background, their actual liquidity was heavily tied up in restricted trusts and leveraged assets. Trish had taken out a massive high-interest commercial loan to fund the spa's custom renovations. She had purchased state-of-the-art cryotherapy chambers, imported European massage tables, and an absurdly expensive bespoke sound system. She was entirely overextended. The success of this spa was not just a vanity project. It was a financial necessity to maintain the illusion of their limitless wealth. If the business failed before it even opened, the debt would instantly crush them. Preston would have to answer to his banking partners regarding the defaulted commercial loans, and Trish would be publicly humiliated. Her entire social standing rested on the foundation of this one commercial lease. I scrolled past the financial disclosures and opened the finalized signed lease agreement. It was a standard commercial contract spanning 50 pages of dense legal jargon, but my attorneys always included specialized proprietary addendums for properties I acquired. I bypassed the sections regarding maintenance schedules, insurance liabilities, and rent escalation. I knew exactly what I was looking for. I wanted to see the exact signature where Trish had unwittingly signed away her future to the woman she despised. My eyes scanned the digital text, scrolling down to page 42, section 8, under tenant conduct and operational standards. I read the words meticulously, letting the absolute power of the legal phrasing wash over me. I traced my finger across the screen, following the precise language of the Morality and Ethical Conduct Clause. It was a beautifully drafted paragraph, It explicitly stated that the landlord retained the unassailable right to immediately terminate the lease agreement and execute a 48-hour eviction if the tenant, or any agent of the tenant, engaged in criminal activity, physical assault, or gross ethical violations that could potentially damage the reputation of the commercial property. It further stipulated that in the event of such a termination, the tenant would forfeit their entire security deposit and remain legally liable for the financial cost of returning the property to its original bare shell condition. I read the clause again, letting a cold, hard smile touch my lips. Stripping a 10-year-old child of her identity, holding her down against her will, and subjecting her to violent racist abuse was not just a family dispute. It was a textbook definition of physical battery and a gross ethical violation. It was the exact trigger required to detonate this legal landmine. Trish genuinely believed that her social status shielded her from consequence. She thought she could abuse my biracial daughter and throw her heritage in the trash, simply because she felt her country club aesthetic was superior. She expected me to swallow the humiliation and keep the peace just like Derek always did. She expected me to stay in my place as the quiet, accommodating sister-in-law who funded her brother's lifestyle. She had no idea that the quiet sister-in-law held the deed to her entire future. By cutting Zoe's hair, she had not just committed a crime against my child. She had breached her commercial lease in the most catastrophic way possible. She had handed me the legal authority to seize her business, lock her doors, and throw her custom Italian massage tables onto the unforgiving Atlanta pavement. I reached for my encrypted smartphone resting on the corner of my desk. I did not need to wait for regular business hours to make my next move. When you pay legal retainers as large as mine, your attorneys answer on the first ring regardless of the time of day. I kept my eyes fixed on the illuminated text of the morality clause as the secure line connected. Right to immediate eviction if the tenant commits gross ethical violations or is involved in criminal activity. The board was perfectly set. The pieces were locked into their final positions. All that remained was calling in the heavy artillery to signal the executioners. The secure line connected on the second ring. I did not bother with pleasantries. I told Victor Thorne, my lead commercial real estate attorney, and Sylvia Grant, my top criminal litigator, to clear their schedules and get to my office immediately. When I mention a code red, my legal team moves with terrifying efficiency. Less than 45 minutes later, the heavy frosted glass doors of my corner office swung open. Victor and Sylvia walked in carrying sleek leather briefcases and expressions of absolute focus. Victor was a shark in a bespoke suit known throughout Atlanta for destroying commercial tenants who tried to exploit property loopholes. Sylvia was a former federal prosecutor who had built her formidable reputation locking away child abusers and violent offenders. I had retained them both on massive annual contracts specifically because they lacked any shred of mercy. I activated the privacy protocols on my office windows, turning the transparent glass opaque to the outside world, and locked the electronic deadbolt. We were completely sealed inside a soundproof vault. I directed them to the massive conference table at the center of the room. I did not offer them coffee or water. I simply turned my primary monitor to face them and hit play on the audio file I had extracted from Zoe's smartwatch. The crisp, high-definition recording filled the pristine office. Trish's venomous voice echoed off the walls, dripping with racist malice, as she held my daughter down. The sickening metallic snip of the scissors sliced through the quiet room, followed by Zoe's desperate sobbing. I watched their micro-expressions carefully. Victor, a man who negotiated multi-million-dollar buyouts without blinking, tightened his jaw so hard the muscle ticked. Sylvia went completely still. Her eyes turned as cold as unpolished steel. She was a professional who had reviewed thousands of hours of horrific evidence, but the sheer cruelty in Trish's tone disgusted her. When the 9-minute recording ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Sylvia was the first to speak. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a fresh legal pad. "This is not a family misunderstanding, Vanessa," she stated, her voice razor sharp. "What we just listened to is aggravated child battery, false imprisonment, and reckless endangerment of a minor." She physically restrained a 10-year-old child to forcibly alter her appearance while subjecting her to racially motivated verbal abuse. The psychological trauma alone is grounds for a massive civil suit, but the criminal charges are undeniable. I can take this audio directly to a district judge I know well. He despises entitled abusers. We can have a felony arrest warrant signed and sealed by tomorrow morning. I nodded approvingly, shifting my gaze to Victor. He was already scrolling through the digital copy of the Magnolia Complex commercial lease agreement I had sent to his tablet. He stopped at page 42, section 8. The morality and ethical conduct clause. He tapped his expensive fountain pen against the screen, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "You drafted this specific addendum perfectly, Vanessa," he said, his eyes gleaming with predatory excitement. Most commercial leases require a 30-day cure period for standard violations. But because this involves documented criminal battery occurring on the leased premises, the emergency breach protocol is immediately activated. She does not get 30 days. She gets a 48-hour notice to vacate. Furthermore, because she fundamentally breached the contract through gross ethical misconduct, she forfeits her entire security deposit. Victor pulled up Trish's financial disclosures on his screen. "It gets better," he continued. "She financed this entire luxury spa build-out using high-interest commercial loans backed by Preston's banking connections. The lease explicitly states that upon a morality breach, the tenant is financially responsible for the demolition costs to return the property to a bare concrete shell. We are not just kicking her out. We are legally burying her in hundreds of thousands of dollars of immediate unpayable debt. If she cannot pay, and she cannot, we can place a lien on any personal assets she holds. We can bankrupt her and her arrogant husband in a single stroke." I leaned back in my leather chair, absorbing the